Ash is a family, and so now we realize we're basically related. So that's great. It's great to see that. So I'm going to bring up our presenters. So we have Pamela Capalad, who's a certified financial planner and accredited financial counter. Any CFPs or AFCs in the house? Show yourself. Show yourself. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. There we go. Who's been in the financial services industry since 2008. She founded Brunch and Budget to help people who felt ashamed or embarrassed about money to have a safe and friendly place to talk about it and make real financial progress. Her mission is to make financial planning as affordable as possible for communities who need it the most. So this is Pamela. And then we have Dyalekt, who's an MC, playwright, and educator, mostly all at the same time. His first album and one-man play, Square Peg Syndrome, helped him get named to the Public Theater's Emerging Writers Group. He also took the show back to St. Croix to rock 17 schools and organizations, along with a 6-week curriculum on identity and literacy. He's been a namestay in New York City's theater and hip-hop scenes. His work focuses on his identity and voice, communicating with others authentically, and building up your community. He also co-hosts the Race and Wealth podcast. Has anyone, if you're not subscribed to that, please do, really important, with Deidre Asante Mohammed, who's the Chief of Equity and Inclusion at NCRC. If you don't know that, definitely subscribe to that. So with that, I will bring up Dyalekt and Pamela. Thank you.
We tend to be roaming, so we're going to grab these roaming mics if that's all right.
Oh yeah, here, there's one here.
Oh, there's the next one over there?
Yeah.
Oh, there's one there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Peace, peace, peace. How y'all doing this morning? I'm liking all the energy being up.
Yes.
Are you not up?
I'm not up.
Yeah.
I'll work this out.
Wait, I think this can come up right here.
Yeah, there we go. See? I told you I had it.
Yes, the magic touch. All right, y'all. We're ready to rock. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, I think we got to stand apart from each other.
Yeah, it can't be too close. Good morning, y'all. We are not quite podium people. We're going to be running around, and I don't know if you can quite call this, a keynote. This is going to be more of a conversation.
I think you can hold on to a mic, and I'm just going to be loud. Is that all right with y'all?
Yes. Okay, cool. Yes, be loud. All right. So today we're going to talk about how financial literacy died. Financial literacy is dead. It's dead. It's time to start teaching about financial resilience.
In fact, that's not even a concept we came up with. We were invited onto a panel that was talking about how financial literacy is dead. And we were like, well, financial literacy, we haven't been talking about that for years. What we talk about is financial capability, as we talked about, and financial resilience. Because all the education in the world is great, but what happens when stuff happens?
We got me one anyway? All right.
There we go.
I'll just be tethered.
Yes.
So you keep me under control.
So this is our favorite slide. We always like to start with this in all of our workshops, right?
Yes.
This is the reality for all of us. It is, especially when you come to a conference or you go to a workshop or you start a financial planning journey. You're like, first I do step 1, then I do step 2, then I do step 3, and then success, right?
No, not always, not the same thing.
Not always. This is the reality, right? This is the reality for our financial journeys, and this is the reality for our journeys as financial educators, right? We learn about financial literacy, then we move on to financial capability, then we move on to financial resilience, and we get there by having setbacks, by seeing what works and seeing what doesn't, and trying new things, and experimenting, and not seeing setbacks as failures, because the reality is, a bad day doesn't have to equal a bad month.
Well, and a bad month doesn't have to be a bad year, and a bad year doesn't have to be a bad career. We focus on our process, and the process is important, but the process must always be malleable. The process is not the goal. The goal is the client or the student, the people that we're working with.
Yeah. So you're to know about us. We don't need to talk much more about that.
Yeah, we do stuff.
Yes.
We do stuff, you've heard stuff. We'll talk more about ourselves. We like talking about that.
Yeah.
But what we want to talk today about, we're going to be discussing a lot of things you guys know about, and we're going to be digging into some of these things. We're going to be having another session in the afternoon. We can talk further about it. But stats versus stories is often the thing that comes up. People say that people like anecdotes more than they like statistics. And they'll listen to an anecdote about a single person, like the whole welfare queen myth, which was derived from a single person, which we'll be talking about a little bit more later.
A single white person.
Yeah, a single white person, actually, funny enough.
Yeah, who actually pretended to be different ethnicities, different races to basically scam the welfare system. That's the real story.
Yeah, a single fraudulent story holding more weight than statistics.
Yep.
One of the interesting things about statistics is a lot of people believe that they speak for themselves. We were just at a conference where they were like, we've got these great stats, and they were really great and powerful stats. And we were like, well, what's the narrative we're building around that? They're like, no, it's all good.
The stats don't lie, right?
Stats don't lie.
Stats don't lie.
Stats don't lie, but statistics and stories have a reflexive property where they have to work with each other, and in different contexts, different statistics mean different things.
So this was something we saw on Instagram literally last week, and I feel like we're all pretty familiar with the racial wealth divide. These stats I feel like we're familiar with. The average black family has less than 10 times the wealth of the average white family. And so we saw this on Instagram, someone tagged me in this, and they were like, oh, is this something that you've seen? And I was like, yeah, this seems right. This is the average net worth of black single women, Hispanic single women, and white single women.
Here's a stat, not lying.
Right, here's the stat.
Here's the conclusion.
This was the following photo on Instagram. This is why they thought the stat existed, right? Studies say an average black woman looks good from head to toe and very flattering, but only worth $10 or less, because they live above their means. That was the story.
I just noticed now that you said studies say an average black. Hey, at least black women, at least the statistics say y'all look good.
And then Hispanic women struggle just as hard, but they are more willing to live within their means and work together as a family. That's the story behind the stat, right? And then this is the conclusion they came to. As for white women, has a median wealth of $40,000. Reason is because they are more open to talk about their financial debt and make the right financial decision. It's wild, right?
A phrase I enjoy that folks like to say is that common sense ain't common.
Yeah.
We have these ideas that come from our lack of experience. You know, I have a lot of sympathy. Well, I guess not a lot of sympathy. I have abstract sympathy for like the anti-vaxxer movement. We currently have a measles outbreak in Williamsburg, y'all. But I understand where it came from. You didn't grow up with any natural predators coming through your bloodstream and killing you. So you're like, oh, we're invincible, it's all good, and all these things you're saying are just made up. They have this common sense because they don't have the research, they don't have the background, they haven't studied.
So how does this happen, right? And today we want to talk about the unbroken line. We start with products and propaganda, and that becomes mythology, and that becomes tradition, and then that becomes truth, right? So
bacon and eggs for breakfast
yeah.
was a marketing scheme in, I think, the 50s.
Yeah.
That wasn't a thing that people ate. And now we think of it as like, that's the breakfast food.
Yeah, get this. So you know how the surprise proposal is a thing, right? It's a tradition. You're supposed to surprise your significant other and say, will you marry me, right? Let one person make the biggest decision of your entire life. Sure, that makes total sense. The way that it started was a De Beers campaign. De Beers did a study and they found that when couples shopped together for the engagement ring, they spent less money than when the man just shopped for the engagement ring themselves. And so they invented the idea of surprise proposals. And now it's tradition, and now it's just what happens.
And this was very recent. I mean, that's basically like if in 50 years, everybody, before they sit down to have their meal, they say, I'm loving it.
Just wait, y'all.
I mean, it sounds silly, but like the De Beers commercial was within the 1900s. This isn't like some ancient thing. Very quickly, we're able to use marketing methods, because marketing methods work, to create truths out of thin air.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to talk about today. So as a culture, how did we allow this to happen? We're talking about the art and media, selective historians, our dog whistle politics, and the paths to whiteness. You know, it's always an interesting thing when you're talking to white people or people of European American descent, because whiteness is not really a thing.
Yeah.
To be honest, you know, all of the other ethnicities aren't really a thing either. Biologically doesn't make any sense. One thing that I really got from my mom that I appreciate is I'm of mixed ethnicity. My mother's black, my dad is Jewish. And my mom said that the reason that we call y'all black no matter what shade you come out is black is the mixture of all of these things. And the thing that we're held together by is our lack of a shared history. In other words, that designation exists because it needs to. The whiteness designation doesn't necessarily need to exist. It was created as a way for people to have dominance over other people. And we found all the other angles and ways that we can fit this. I mean, there was a time when the Irish weren't white. And man, Irish folks are pale as all get out. Like if anyone could literally call themselves white, it's Irish people, but they, Irish do not apply and all that.
Jewish people are recently white.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's keep.
Yeah.
So before we get to this, we have some unfriendly and ugly imagery that we're going to be sharing. I just want to warn y'all as we're going through this. So talk about a little bit about the art and media. One of the first ways that newly free Black Americans were able to sustain themselves and make new businesses, points of entrepreneurship, was fried chicken and watermelon. Because you could raise chicken in smaller, squalid conditions. Watermelon could grow in small patches. This was the first time these people who were not being given jobs were able to build business for themselves and not only make it so that they could eat, but they could provide things for other folks, create community in that way. And the theater, the minstrel shows, the ads, the newspaper articles talked about how this was a tool of the lazy and stupid. And how simultaneously this was something that proved that Black people were chilling and doing just fine. What's terrible and terrifying about this is a long time ago, but I don't know if there are any Black folks in this room who hasn't had an uncomfortable experience with fried chicken and watermelon. I remember as a child being told not to eat fried chicken in front of white people, and I didn't understand why. They took something that was a point of pride and an excellent, viable model and made us ashamed of it within a few generations, to the point where it lasts until today. It's terrifying. Uncle Tom. Anybody read Uncle Tom's Cabin? A couple of y'all, but not everybody, even though it's a stone cold classic. This is one of my favorite things about the way that, it's TV today, but it was the minstrel show, theater shows of the time. Uncle Tom is not an Uncle Tom, if you read Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom was a man who died being whipped and didn't give up the information of these escaped slaves. The people at that time did not like the idea of this being an image in a best-selling book. So they started making these minstrel shows where they depicted all the Black people as being happy and happy-go-lucky and having a good time. And everybody was, yes, master, dancing and shuffling. And they managed to take this powerful book and turn it into a slur. So that in our lifetime, someone who was considered a sellout in the Black community was an Uncle Tom. When it comes to history, I feel like everybody here has had some odd encounter where someone's like, well, Dr. King said that, what he stood for is whatever I wanted it to be.
How did Dr. King's name get weaponized like that, right? All of a sudden.
Well, it's generally one of the things that has happened throughout history is once they've actually taken you off the board, they can say whatever they want about you. Dr. King was public enemy #1. He was terrifying. All of the stuff they say about El-Haj Malik Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, they felt just the same way about Dr. King. But the narrative has been shifted because they wanted us to look away from the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah.
And the ideas of actual unity that he professed.
They wanted us to feel like we won the civil rights movement. So they used him as a symbol, even though when he was alive, they literally told him to kill himself. The FBI sent him letters that said, kill yourself.
Yeah, man, you thought like teenagers on Twitter are bad.
Yeah.
Never worse than the FBI. It's such a mess. Wow, right? What's really scary about this one, look how recent it is.
Recent it is.
Wow. Yes, you
Yeah, this isn't from 1925.
This wasn't from the 80s.
This is not from 1985.
Yeah.
This is within the last 20 years.
Yeah. The imagery is still with us. They're still using this imagery.
And when we talk about the paths to whiteness, there's the idea of the model minority. I feel like some of y'all have heard of that term. Model minority was also created as a way to create further division and show another narrative reason why Black and Latino folks were not doing well in this country.
Right, and it came from, if you go to the next slide, it came from a very small subset of Japanese immigrants. This idea that, oh, everyone has it hard, but Asian people figured it out, right? They figured it out. They're the model minority. They just work hard enough and they were able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and whatever. And then they created this narrative and created another path to whiteness that I see a lot of Asian American communities moving towards.
Very cherry-picked and ignores the not affluent Cambodian, Filipino, and other Asian communities. Like I said about these things not really having any actual sense, it's just a thing that we can sort of lump together. The homogeneity and the standardization is something that overlooks all of the important nuance for all of these things.
Yeah. And so what happens when we create this unbroken line of culture and art and media? What do we let happen with policy, with acts, and with history, right?
Well, it becomes common sense.
Yeah.
It becomes just a thing that we know. These people, they're lazy. They have a tendency towards that. These people, they're just not as bright. Remember there was the eugenics movement where they tried to do silly stuff like measuring the size of heads to determine brain capacity. And if there's any brain surgeons in the house, you know, probably a lot of brain surgeons here, then you know that actually has nothing to do with nothing.
Yeah. And so this country, starting with Bacon's Rebellion, this was the creation of the division between black and white and the concept of someone being black or someone being white. Is Bacon's Rebellion, black and white indentured servants and slaves decided to get together and rebel against their slave masters. Now, Bacon's Rebellion didn't succeed, but the slave masters were afraid. And they're like, oh, this can't happen again. And so what they did for economic reasons was they let indentured servants basically be free because they couldn't tell the difference between a white indentured servant and themselves, right? And they said, all right, and then people who were from African countries remain slaves for the rest of their lives, and their descendants remain slaves. And that's how white and black was created in this country.
Yeah, and one thing about that I really want to emphasize is that institutional racism is not from emotion. It is a cold-hearted financial business decision.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did was we created narratives around that to give us emotional qualities that tie us to this. But the folks who made it, that was just good business for them.
Yeah.
We're not going to go through all of these.
Yes.
This is just a smattering. We've got a couple of pages
Yeah,
of them,
definitely.
of the things that have been going on, the policies, the unbroken line that has been created.
I want to specifically point out the ones where it comes to homeownership, because that's a stat that's going around, is that 74% of white Americans are homeowners versus 40% of black Americans. And the story behind that has been, oh, black Americans just aren't great at saving. They just haven't been able to do it, right? And the reality is, the home ownership aspect of this country goes all the way back to the 1800s. The Homestead Act, where if you were a white male citizen, you were just allowed to land grab. They literally just said, put your flag down and it's yours, starting in the 1800s. And then if you go...
Yeah, the middle class was built by our government,
Yeah,
by our
absolutely.
country. We've done it collectively. No one pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. Fun etymology thing, does anyone know where the bootstraps term comes from?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a parody.
Yeah.
It was meant as a joke. It was basically sarcastic, saying it's not possible, because if you think about the strap on the back of your shoes, you can't pull yourself up by that. So it was an insult toward people who thought self-reliance was the only way forward.
Oh man, Travis, thank you
Yes,
for that.
thank you.
It was actually in a novel that was like an Indiana Jones type of
Yeah.
story was where it originated from. Thank you, that was really succinct and to the point.
Yeah, I love it. So if you look at the GI Bill, where technically everyone who served the country as a veteran was allowed to have access to VA mortgages, technically, except if you look at the numbers, 3,000 VA home loans were issued in Mississippi, and only 2 of those loans were issued to black veterans. Yeah. Yeah, redlining in the 30s and 70s. Redlining was sanctioned by our government. It started with the Federal Housing Administration. They would only subsidize white suburbs.
Well, and today, ProPublica a couple of years ago revealed that there was redlining going on Facebook. People were using the Facebook affinities to exclude groups of people from being able to even see homes.
And mortgages, and change the mortgage rates, yep.
So, the story behind this, and I've heard this so many times, is that we don't prioritize saving. Black people don't prioritize saving, poor people don't prioritize saving, whatever group it is that you're not sure why they're not doing better, is that they just don't make things a priority. Instead, they spend their money frivolously.
That's the story, right?
Right? I mean, you may hear some other adjective, it may be selfishly, it may be stupidly, depending on, how polite people want to be. But they think that it's a poor decision that they've made. Back to this stat again. Does this say anything about how anyone spends their money? There's nothing implied there. You see, this idea of frivolity is based on two myths that we're going to go over. One is the binary, and two is the assumption of why. So first of all, the binary. Yeah, binaries are really powerful. Yes, no, good, bad, smart, stupid, pass, fail. We grow up with a lot of binaries, and it makes things easier to define in small and simple ways. And somehow, you can't be spending on things that you need, dealing with emergencies, taking care of responsibilities and family. No, you must be spending it on something silly. We were doing a teacher training in California, and after spending, a week with the kids and all this great stuff, and the teacher's in building, the teacher says to me, I know all of these kids' parents have big screen TVs. One, you pretty creepy if you just sneak it into people's homes to find out what size TV they got. Two, I don't know if you guys know this, but rich parents also have big TVs. Yep, they spend frivolously too. See, the reality is that most of us as planners, as educators, we don't know enough about our students or our clients' values to even know what frivolous means in that context, let alone whether or not what they're doing is in line with their values. So, on the point of that, I would like to ask everyone to find a money buddy for this session, because we're going to be doing a couple of things. This is a really important thing to us. If there's nothing else that you get from us, and I hope you get a lot from us, because we're here talking to y'all, please continue to talk about money. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but you got to preach to the choir so they know what to sing. Please continue to talk to each other about money. It's an important thing. Pam, in her first contract, was told she could not talk about her salary.
I could lose my job. I could get fired if I shared my salary with my coworkers. Money is the last taboo. Parents are more afraid to talk to their kids about money than about sex or drugs.
Or terrorism.
Or terrorism.
They'll talk to the kids about terrorism. They can tell you about ISIS before they tell you about money.
Yeah, right? So why is that? Where did this taboo come from? Where did this emotional shame and embarrassment come from? When we all have to deal with money, we're all dealing with setbacks, we're all dealing with mistakes, right? Where did that come from? Whose narrative is that supporting? And so we want you to start breaking down the taboo today. I'm sure you already are. And find a money buddy.
It could be someone you know, someone you don't know, doesn't really matter. If we're uneven here, it could be groups of three, that's fine too.
3 money buddies is good. And with your money buddy, we want you to take couple minutes or 1 minute.
A minute. You got about a minute.
Write down the last 10 things you bought recently.
I'm gonna run something one more time. All right, did everybody get 10 things down? No, you didn't. I have to say, I have to apologize. I'm free now, so I can run amongst y'all. I got to apologize, everybody. I'm going to tell you the truth. We did this to mess with y'all.
We tricked you. That was hard, right?
It's really hard writing down 10 things, the last 10
10
things.
things you bought. I don't remember the last 2 things I bought. I remember doing this activity and I cheated. I pulled up my Mint account. I was like,
I know that we're educators and we're planners and all this kind of good stuff, so we know what we're supposed to do. But does anyone here like budgeting? Couple of y'all.
my spreadsheet people, all right? Thank you.
Yeah, my spreadsheeters. I remember the first time I opened up Mint.com and I was really excited because, as a creative, I love all the visual stuff.
Yeah,
and
pretty.
It was pretty. It gave me like the little pie charts and stuff. I didn't have to make them. I loved it. And then I put in all my stuff. And then after a month, it told me I went $50 over on my food budget.
Nothing happened after.
But, well,
kept eating.
No, there was a red bar. They had a red bar. And I was like, okay. It said I'm wrong. Like, I guess I'm wrong. I guess I'm bad at this. But I'm still hungry. Y'all see me, I'm skinny, man. I can't like miss a meal. I'll just float away. I gotta have my food. And then I put it away. I didn't mess with it after that.
That's what happens. So one of the best pieces of financial financial advice I ever got is where you spend your money is a representation of what you value.
You always put your money where your mouth
Always.
is. Always.
Before you pull out spreadsheets, before you pull out the mint.com, figure out what you actually value. And we have a matrix for you to help you do that.
For our math people.
Yes.
This is a matrix. It's not a mathematical matrix, it's a feelings matrix.
Yes, it's a feelings matrix. So we call it the spending values matrix. We actually do this activity with kids as young as 5 and 6, all the way up through adulthood. Yeah.
We didn't invent this, by the way. This is the productivity matrix.
Yes.
That's
urgent
used in
important
business,
matrix.
urgent important matrix that's used
Yeah.
in productivity, and we repurposed it because we think that it works well in terms of figuring out your values.
Yes. So the first box on the top left is the basics.
Did anybody put their rent or
Cell
any
phone
bills?
bill as something they spend. Oh, nice. Those are the basics.
Somebody else.
There you go. Those are the kinds of things we sometimes forget, right? It's like, oh yeah, I did spend money on that. Hold on. The basics are your fixed expenses, right? They're the ones that you have to spend money on because you're like, okay, I physically need these things to live, like my cell phone. Transportation, internet, your utility bills, all of that stuff, the basics. Guess what? You figure out that number once, and you don't have to track it again.
Yo, the biggest busy work budgeting thing I've seen is like every time you go to start a budget again, you start going over those basics.
Right?
Because you're like, those are the things I know. And I'm just going to do that, and now I'm tired, and I'm going to put it away. And then 3 months later, I'm going to start doing it again. Oh, what's my rent? Here we go.
Still the same, hopefully.
It should be paid attention to because, you know, folks love to stick in hidden fees and change stuff around.
So you
But for the
should know
most
what those
part,
are.
put it away.
Yeah.
Put it aside. You know what you got.
Yes.
The next part is where it gets a little
The
interesting.
details where you don't really need to buy coffee every day,
But you need to buy coffee every day.
right?
Oh, it doesn't have to be coffee.
Yeah.
Maybe you love sneakers, or maybe you're a video game head. Maybe you just like going out to the movies with your friends. You've got a social activity that's important to you, that feeds you emotionally, that makes it easier to get through the life that we have.
Yeah, and these are the things about the details is those are the things that we're told to feel the most guilty about. We think of them first, we enjoy them, we want to make them a regular part of our lives, and they're the first thing that people tell us to cut. Oh, you buy coffee every day? Well, you know, if you took that $5 and you spent on coffee and you put it into a savings account, and then compound interest, and then a million maybe.
This is how you deal with those people. You have to, come with kindness. You put your arm around them,
Aw.
you put one foot in front of the other, and push. The reality is, you're not actually saving that money
You're not.
and becoming a millionaire off the non-coffee drinking.
You're not taking that $5 and literally putting it into savings account. What we see happen really is you're so good all week, right? You're like, all right, I'm going to give up that coffee. I'm going to give up going to the movies. You're so good all week or all month or whatever it is. And then one day you're like, you know what? I've been so good all week.
I'm gonna treat myself.
I dessert, let me get a coffee, and let me take myself out to dinner. And you know what? I haven't had a massage in a while. Let me do that too. It's been a while since I've been shopping.
I was talking about like the sneakerheads, like the people who like spend like hours in line waiting for the new shoes. Oftentimes when you get to the front of the line, those shoes aren't there. How many people have gone somewhere to spend some money on a thing, the thing you wanted wasn't there, and you spent that money anyway? You were ready to spend money.
Your body was ready.
It's telling you to do that. And you didn't even have the thing you wanted. We're all very smart people. And we're all on top of it. We know that advertising is game and that, McDonald's and In-N-Out, they use red and yellow to get our impulse centers. And if you got a Popeyes near you, my Subway stop in New York was right above the Popeyes. And I don't even like them, but they be wafting that smell up there. Woo!
When you're tired and hungry, that's what you get.
Well, that's the thing, is most of the time I'm good. I'm like, yeah, I don't need that. I'm gonna go get my groceries and stuff. But when you're worn out, that's when they get you.
Right.
I mean, when you're tired, your friends can convince you to do stuff you didn't want to do. Like, oh, I'm up here.
It's true. So what ends up happening, especially when one, you don't know what your details are, and if you do, you deny yourself of the details, is you end up spending money anyway, but it ends up getting spent on the nothing. Now, the nothing may be things that didn't even make it on your list. The nothing are those things that you didn't remember and you didn't write down and you had a hard time when you go back and you see, where did all my money go? And that's where it went.
The nothing is when you bought the coffee, but But then you also got a Danish, because like it was in my face and I was tired, it looked pretty. I don't even really like Danishes, but you ate that. The nothing is when you went to Walgreens to pick up something and they had all those little items and then, see, I see folks already like,
Somebody spent $100 at Walgreens.
Oh, they got a new flavor chapstick. That's yeah. The thing about the nothing and the details, it can be hard to tell which one is which. And Pam was alluding to the thing that we use as our beginning of a guide is, do you remember it? Does it make a good story? Man, I love telling this story about how we went to San Diego for this conference and there was the Lucha Libre burrito shop. And they were having a special that if you tried all
the burrito challenge.
Of their, the burrito challenge. If you tried all of their 5 new burritos, they would send you a t-shirt and a medal that let you skip in line. And the place was cool. It had Lucha Libre masks everywhere, had a championship belt VIP section and all that stuff.
We spent $100 on burritos in like 3 days.
In 3 days. And it was worth it. Because I get to tell that story for the rest of my life. That was something I valued. That was not frivolous spending. That's something that will allow me to make better financial decisions, because I could be like, no, I got a good life. I could chill. I don't need to spend this on this, man. Oh, this burrito, this isn't Lucha Libre burrito, so it must not be worth it.
Yep, exactly. Because that's the thing about the details is they're the things you look forward to because they replenish your willpower. It doesn't have to be anything huge. It can be something you treat yourself to every day because you're like, you know what? I just want to look forward to this little thing every single day.
Pam, can you tell them about your magic trick?
Yes.
I like to call this a financial magic because this is one of my favorite things about the Urgent Report Matrix.
I love Mint.com, I do. And I actually put all my stuff into Mint.com for the first time back in 2009 when it first started, and I was like, oh, let me see how much money I'm spending on all these things. I was totally horrified when I saw all of it. I was spending 1/3 of my paycheck on food. I had no idea. I was spending about $700 a month on food. $200 of it was on groceries, and $500 of it was on eating out. And the thing is, my details was I love going to restaurants. I love trying new things. I love going out to eat dinner with friends. And I saw that number and my first thought was like, I don't want to give that up, so should I just stop budgeting? I don't know. And what I did was I looked at the transactions and I saw where the money was going and I realized about like 250 of it was going to restaurants and the other 250 was going to buy $10 salads at work. I know, I had no idea. It was this habit that just happened out of convenience. And so I was like, all right, well, I gotta change that because I don't even remember eating those salads. So I just did an experiment where I decided I would bring a loaf of bread and a pound of turkey to work every day and just make a sandwich every day instead of buying salad. And I wanted to see if I noticed the difference. And by the end of the week, I didn't. And all of a sudden, I found myself not only giving myself more money to go to restaurants, but also saving $200 a month on food and instead being able to put it towards the yes box.
Contrary to a lot of financial advice, she was able to spend more money on the things she values and save more money than she had ever done before.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
The yes box is the final box, and the yes box practically translates into a savings account. It's the thing you're going to be putting money towards, and we call it the yes box because, you know, we usually call it emergency fund, savings cushion. We call it the yes box because we want it to be something where you can say yes. You don't even have to know what you're saving for. A lot of people have a hard time saving if they don't know what the thing they're saving for is, right? But if you can give them an idea of what feeling they're saving for, the ability to say yes, the ability to have freedom, security, peace of mind, whatever it is, then saving somehow becomes easier.
Yeah, it's okay to save for an emergency. I think that that's a good thing. We should have our emergency funds together. I think those are good floors to start with. But then we have to build beyond that. I think one of the bigger problems that I've found across the country with a lot of financial education institutions is we're just trying to get our heads above water. We're just doing just enough so that you're not drowning, and I guess that means you're okay. But then we don't have any mobility. We're not able to rise. When we work with students, people will bring in, oh, here's people who work at this chain restaurant, here's people who work at this chain retail place, never entrepreneurs. We are able to survive, but never able to thrive. For a lot of folks, the S-Box needs to be something practical at first for them to figure out what they were doing. And that's fine. Remember we were showing the squiggly line before. Those physical things can lead to the emotional thing and the thing that you want to have. I was saving, as a musician, I was saving up for an album. I had made like little EPs and homemade brews, stuff like that, but I wanted to pay for a nice studio, really good marketing, all of that stuff, and I was saving up money, and I got a phone call from these guys I knew in the Czech Republic who I'd done some work with, and they wanted to fly me out to come and perform with them. All these countries, I'd never been to Europe before, it was going to be this big thing, but they needed me to buy the ticket to Paris for the first leg, and the tour started the next week.
That's an expensive ticket.
So I took that money that I was going to spend on that studio record, and I paid for my first tour. The flyer said Brooklyn really big and my name really small. I got to go and perform in all these countries. And it was great, and they loved it, and I did well, and I was able to come back later, and I made money, and I got more money in New York because I'd done well in Europe, and I basically got to jumpstart my career through having money saved. And I wasn't quite sure what it was for. I had this idea that it was for this album, but it was really so that I had options in my creative career.
Yeah. Yes, Box is options.
Yeah, yes, box is options.
Where's your clicky thing? Oh, okay. Yes. So, myth number 2, assumptions.
So, you know, assumptions of what happened is okay. Oh, these are just deep pockets. That's funny a financial thing, right? Out here with deep pockets and short arms and all that. That's an assumption that folks make. I like assumptions. People like talking about making an ass out of you and me. I like you, I like me, and ass be happening, so it's all right, right? Assumptions are a great way to bump your head up against the wall, to actually contrast your ideas with data and see what really happens. Assumptions of what? Assumptions of why? They're nigh impossible. Discerning and figuring out the why of why people do stuff is dangerous. It's something I see all the time with education. They're like, oh, I know these kids are doing this stuff because they're and then, like, you know, they're disrespectful or they're loud. It's nothing about you. These assumptions of why are how we take stats and manipulate them. We take these actual realities, these facts, and manipulate them into all caps truths. Truth has been such a dangerous word lately. You'll often hear people say, like, I gotta live my truth. And I'm like, I thought it was our truth. If it's not our truth, then what is it really? Ooh. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, usually when folks are doing this, they're using their deductive reasoning, which is probably best left to television detectives. I love all these shows. They're fun to figure out. The funny thing about this, now I also have experience studying as a playwright, I've done some TV work and writing for things like that, and I don't know if you know this, but the majority of TV writers who write detective stories have exactly 0 detectiving experience. In fact, it has been shown that our lack of understanding about how detective work and deductive reasoning works is because of these TV shows. See what I'm saying to y'all about the unbroken line? We continuously have propaganda that is often presented as entertainment, which confuses us and creates common sense out of nonsense, out of thin air. So standards.
They suck, right? We hate
Standards
standardized
suck.
tests. We always say that. Standardized tests suck. IQ tests don't test how smart you actually are. So why do we rely on financial literacy tests to determine whether someone is financially capable?
Have you
Why
seen
do
some of those tests, those like pre and post tests that the state will give you? Oh man, it'll be like, do they know how to write a check?
I don't anymore.
I mean, yeah, sure, they know how to write a check. I don't think that's the thing that they need. A lot of times do they know how to count coins? Things that will tell you what money is, that will, I guess, make you more literate, but what is that actually going to help you with?
Yeah. So the thing about these standards, and we want to move away from them, or create new standards, is they're not indicators of success, and they're not predictors of success. Have you all heard of the marshmallow test? The marshmallow test, right? So
Very
you probably
popular.
heard of it, yeah, very popular. There's very cute videos on YouTube about children trying not to eat a marshmallow.
Ooh, my favorite is the one kid who games the system and holds it up to her face and then eats the whole thing out from the middle but leaves the shell.
Yeah. She got that second marshmallow.
Genius, that little girl.
Yeah. So the thing about the marshmallow test is basically how it works is you put a child in a room and you say, hey, you can eat this marshmallow, but if you wait 5 minutes and you don't eat the marshmallow, then I'll give you another marshmallow, right? And so originally it was designed to predict a child's willpower, delay gratification. If you can do it at an early age, it meant, oh, you know how to, delay gratification, which leads to personal responsibility, which then leads us to greater success in life, right? That was their hypothesis.
Yeah.
And so they followed these kids afterwards, and they found that this was the case, and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And people have tried to replicate it since then.
Yeah, recent replications have disproven that hypothesis.
Yeah.
They've shown that
Yeah.
it's not actually at all a predictor of personal responsibility. No, it suggests that other possible explanations for why poor kids would be less motivated. Daily life holds few guarantees. Tomorrow is not promised. For folks who have been promised things, that have worked hard and busted their behind and then gotten nothing at the end of the day, what reason is there for them to ever not take that marshmallow that's right in front of their face?
You're going to eat that marshmallow. This is why it's not a willpower thing when people have a hard time saving sometimes. It's I don't think this thing is going to be here tomorrow, so let me just use it now.
In fact, they are using excellent deductive reasoning.
Yes.
They're going based on past information to inform their future decisions.
Yes, The Atlantic did a whole article and expose on the myth of the marshmallow test.
So, we learned all this stuff, and we're talking, and we're smart, and we went to learn all this thing, we got experience, and what happens when clients just do the wrong thing anyway, right? Because folks do that, they know all this
Do
stuff.
all this stuff. And
We
like,
do that.
I get it.
I know all this stuff, and I will do the wrong thing anyway, every time.
Yep, it's true.
So, do they have to change their mindset?
Is that what we're trying to do?
Mindset is an interesting word. That is another one of the ones that we misconstrue a lot. Mindset, as it's defined, is about our attitudes, preconceived attitudes that we have.
Yeah.
And, when we have an understanding of what our attitudes are. So
we have a quiz for y'all. Now we
pop
have a
quiz.
test.
Yeah, you didn't think you was getting a pop quiz at 9 in the morning.
So,
With your money, buddy.
with your money, buddy, we want you to answer these 2 questions. The first question is, what do you relate to more? Do you think more about what's in the bank now and it doesn't feel real until it's in your hands? A, that's 1A. Or 1B, are you usually spending the next check in your head before it hits your account?
And
So-
for the, yeah.
And then for the second question, which phrase do you relate to more? Are you someone who tends to plan ahead or someone who tends to deal with things as they come? So remember, if you answered A or B for 1 and A or B for 2, we'll give you a couple minutes.
AB, BA, or BB, we're going to throw in some twos. He's wrong.
Yes.
It's a personality test.
Nobody's wrong. Anyone taken a personality test before? One of those
Yeah.
BuzzFeed?
Ravenclaw.
Ravenclaw. That's right.
So we made another matrix. This is another feelings matrix. You can plot where you are on these things. And this deals with the word that I like to use. I was talking about attitudes, but the word I like to use are tendencies. These are the feelings that you have. They're not to be misconstrued with how your mind works. This is that little thing on your shoulder that's always telling you things. And it doesn't matter how much more education you get, how much smarter, how much better your decision making becomes, how much better your habits become. You will always have these feelings. I know my money personality, and I am that person today,
And
even
you were
as
that
I'm in
person
front
when
of
you
you.
were a kid.
Yeah.
That's what happens. We actually also do this exercise with kids as young as 6, and I have to tell you, we've also had kids as young as 6 tell us that they feel like they're bad at money.
Right?
That's how young it starts. You develop your relationship with money that early from whatever stories or things you hear. People tell you, oh, you don't seem to be good at saving. Oh, you spend all your money, it looks like, don't you? That starts early, right? And so the money personalities, we identified 4 money personalities. We didn't make this up, but we modified it a little bit. And so if you answered A for 1 and A for 2, you are a complicator. Where are my complicators? A for... Oh,
I figured
hello,
it'd be a lot in this house.
complicators. I'm also a complicator, surprise. So complicators, the way that we deal with money is we tend to think about everything at once, and we tend to try and make everything a priority, right? And so I know I've been a complicator since I was a little kid. I remember my parents would give me $2 for lunch every single day, and instead of spending the $2 on lunch, I would get away with spending 50 cents and buying a cookie so I could get through the rest of the day. I would pocket the other $1.50. I don't know why. I was 12. My parents gave me money for everything. I don't know what I was saving for.
And then you bought yourself a car at prom.
That is not even what happened.
That's not
That's
what
the sad part. I don't even know where that money went. I was just saving just in case. I was going through all of these what if scenarios in my head. What could go wrong? What if I needed the money one day? Maybe I should just save it just in case, right? And so with complicators, and I love being a complicator, I really like knowing where everything is. I check my bank account balance multiple times a day. I want to know where all the dollars are. I'm a spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets type of person, right? The thing with complicators is we just have to figure out what we actually need to let go of and what is actually a priority versus what we're just making a priority.
On the other side of the coin, if you answered A for 1 and B for 2, A, B, you might be a contemplator. Any contemplators?
Yeah, a couple
Contemplators are similarly very smart when it comes to money. They know all of the facts and figures in their head. They know when the bills come. They know it's okay, it comes on the 1st, but it's not actually due until the 3rd, and it's not late until the 5th, and then it's only a $10 fee until we get to the 15th, and then, they're not going to shut off my power because it's wintertime, and they got all that going on up here.
That's me out right now.
But on the other side of what the complicator does, instead of making everything a priority, they make none of it a priority. They don't want to think about this, which I feel and I understand that, like just want to live your life and do your thing. But then what ends up becoming the priority oftentimes is the thing that is banging at your door the loudest. And the problem with that, while the complicator needs to get more control, less control, the contemplator needs to take a little bit of control. Because when you're not in control of who you're paying your bills to, you can't pay yourself first, because you're not prioritizing anything, including yourself. Yeah.
So if you answered B for 1 and A for 2, you're probably a paper chaser. Any paper chasers?
Paper chasers? A lot of paper chasers too.
All right. So paper chaser's solution to their money problems is, if I just make more money, it will solve all my problems, right?
Well,
that sounds right?
Well, that's the thing, is like paper chaser often sounds like it's the correct personality. Like that's the one that you should be. I don't want anyone to think that they need to change their personality into any of the other ones. The paper chaser is great when the money's flowing. But you can be a contemplator when the money's coming in. You can pay all of those late fees. You're like, yeah, I got it. But hey, anyone who has ever worked for things like the Board of Ed, what happens when that $10,000 check is now 6 months late?
Yeah. So the thing with paper chasers is paper chasers are great at making money, and because they're so good at making money, they have a hard time keeping it. And they have a hard time saying, oh, let me put some of this away. Instead, they're short-term planning for the next thing. They're like, oh, this next check is coming. What am I going to do with it? Oh, I want this thing. So are great at making.
I'm like, I can eat ramen noodles, it's gonna be all right. But the important thing, we gotta let you know, because we have to wrap up and get out of here in a second. But the really important thing, I gotta let you guys know, whether you're a money monk or not, because most of us are marginalized and gaslighted and have all these things that are put on us to make us make poor decisions. When I have asked for less money than my work is worth in music, in theater, in education, all around, I not only get less money, I get less respect. I get less done, I'm less likely to be asked back. When I ask for my rates, man, I will have the green room with the green M&Ms. They got the contract for next year, and here's the local news ready to shoot things and all of that stuff. So the thing that I always ask people, whether I'm talking to students, whether I'm talking to educators, as a money monk, and I think most of us need to do this, is whenever you're negotiating for money, and you know you're going to undervalue yourself, and you know you've got that tiny, small, not enough figure in your head, when you come out your mouth, double that number.
Yeah, double it.
If it's a lot, they'll negotiate.
Does anyone have their stomach drop a little when you say
Mine
that?
does every time I say it. I know that this is a big responsibility.
It's a lot.
But if people don't want to pay what your work is worth, then they are not worth your time.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, thank you. It's very important that we make sure that we value the things that we do, or else no one else will.
Yes.
And that leads us
Mindset.
to our mindset. Remember, it's not our job to change mindsets.
Yep. That's the thing is, we don't want to change your money personality. We want you to understand what your money personality is so you can build habits around that will support you and you can find success within that. And that's why we start with understanding what your relationship to money is.
This is what we need to do. We need to remove the standards. We need to focus on helping learners define their value and find out what success means to them. Because that's when we're going to be able to make actual change, create mobility, capability, and resilience for the people that we work with.
So we want to move away from financial literacy, these expectations that we put on ourselves and other people, and understand what financial resilience really looks like. It is not a straight line, and we know that. And how can we help support clients through that?
Yeah, with financial literacy, you're able to understand, which is a good baseline. With financial resilience, we are able to overcome.
That's it. So this afternoon we'll be back. We're going to talk about what financial resilience looks like for your clients, so we can start changing the narrative. Let's change the metrics so we can change the narrative.
And we're going to be around to build. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you all so much.